So basically, Paul here is in front of Festus, who is a Roman ruler. Festus knows that Paul has appealed his case to Caesar, and he needs to send him off with a note saying, this is what this man is being charged with. The problem is Festus knows there's no charges that hold any water at all. So he's got nothing to write, and that's kind of a problem. He's going to feel really stupid, like, hey, Nero, what's going on? This is Paul, and I have no reason to be sending him to you.
He didn't do anything wrong, but here he is.
Yeah, he appealed, so here he is. So he calls in, Festus calls in Herod Agrippa II, because this is a guy who's also Roman ruler, but he has way more background with the Jews. He rules over that territory, so he kind of knows what their religion is. He knows their culture and all of this stuff. So Paul just presented his case before Herod Agrippa and his wife / sister, nasty, Bernice. A lot of incest going on in the Herod.
It was not great.
No. Anyway, at the end of Paul's testimony, Festus just blurts out, like he shouts, Paul, you are insane. This is insane. You've lost your mind. And so we didn't quite have time to read Paul's response to that. And also when he, after that, he says to Herod Agrippa, basically like, are you ready? I know you believe this. I know you know this is true. And Herod Agrippa, we ended last week with Herod going, are you... kind of ha 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 ha. You can just kind of see him. Ha ha. Are you trying to convince me in such a short period of time to convert to your religion? Ha 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 ha. You know, he's kind of making a joke out of it. So we're going to hear what Paul's response was to Herod Agrippa II saying that.
Yeah, let me read. I'm going to start in, this is Acts chapter 26, verse 29. It says, and Paul said, whether short or long, I would to God that not only you, but also all who hear me this day might become such as I am, except for these chains. Then the king rose, and the governor and Bernice and those who were sitting with them. And when they had withdrawn, they said to one another, this man is doing nothing to deserve death or imprisonment. And Agrippa said to Festus, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar.
Which wasn't really true, but
no, it's not true.
We'll back up for just a second. I just thought Paul's response, Noelle, was so kind. Especially the part where he said, I wish you would be like me. In other words, I wish for you to know Jesus. I wish you were just like me and that you would know him except for not these chains. Not these chains, by the way, which you're responsible for. Extremely
really kind.
Gracious response. Most people figure that Festus and Agrippa could have absolutely released Paul, right?
Absolutely. Well, think about it. If you realize that this guy is not actually guilty of anything, regardless of whether he appealed to Caesar or not, there's nothing to appeal at this point. Exactly. So just logically, you let the guy go. This is the whole reason we have an appeal process. He's like stage 0.5 in stage 1, you just let him go at this point. There's no reason to keep him around for this. Right. I wonder why, at this point, they wouldn't let him go. Because, I mean, all the commentators, for the most part, I think all historians agree, they had full ability. Also, who would have ever been like, oh man, you let him go? Nero would be like, oh, I can't believe you didn't send him to us. There just was really no risk to them.
The risk was the Jews. They know the second they let him go, those Jews are going to revolt. And when the Jews revolt, you're in big trouble as a Roman leader. So they don't want that. And so they really are caught between a rock and a hard place here. They continue to have the same problem with the Jewish people. They want Paul dead. And in the providence of God, had he released him, they would have ambushed him and killed him.
Right.
So even though we go, that wasn't fair, that wasn't right, in God's providence, he goes, the safest place for Paul right now is in Roman custody.
Right.
He goes free and the Jews will take him out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Paul's going to go to Rome now. And he's been dying to go there for a long, long time.
But it will not be easy, will it?
It's going to be a harrowing experience to get there.
Easy.
We're not even going to get all the way there tonight, I know, but we'll take a gander at it. While he's in Rome, just of interest, he writes 4 books of our New Testament, and many of you will be familiar with these. He wrote the book of Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon from Rome. So he's got to get to Rome because God knows those are wonderful books and we desperately, desperately need them.
Just as a note, and you'll watch for this as we read this, Dr. Luke gives some of the most precise details on nautical everything from this time period. Apparently, a lot about what we know of first century sailing and just nautical things comes from this account because Dr. Luke was so precise and so specific that we can glean a lot of detail from this. We'll talk about that more in just a little bit, but I don't think it's an accident that, once again, the Bible is a standard for truth.
It's the authority.
Yeah, for truth, for accuracy, for precision. During this voyage, again, spoiler, they're going to lose everything. Paul's lost everything multiple times now. Yeah. We also know, and I'm giving some spoilers, we're about to have a shipwreck. This isn't his first shipwreck either. We know he's had at least 3 before this, up to this point. So I say all of that because I think of if I were Paul in this scenario, and frankly, if I were Paul, I never would have gotten into this scenario because I would not have been half as faithful as this guy. But I'd just be exhausted. And maybe you're a little bit exhausted doing this with us. You're like, oh my word, everywhere this guy goes, it's just like some terrible tragedy, disaster after another.
Satan's trying to take him out.
He is, but
God prevails.
It's also interesting to me that, this is Paul's last trip, and it's just a whole situation. God knew that this was happening. God's not on like plan C or plan D at this point. All of what's about to happen is still plan A for God. Yep. So he's not confused or surprised. He had all this ready to go. Let me just read verse 1 for you and then we'll kind of take it apart. This is chapter 27. It says, "And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius." Okay. When we say they delivered Paul, we have the chapter breaks, but it's just referring to Festus and Agrippa. Maybe Bernice was in there. So they decided, he's going to sail to Italy, and they pick a centurion for him to go with. Of interest, if you've been with us, you've heard about a lot of centurions, and they're always portrayed in a really positive light. These are Roman soldiers. They have 100 or so men under them. So they're actually very high up in the Roman military. This is not a low-level position to be in charge of 100 people. They always seem to respond to the gospel and treat God's people well, which is it's kind of an interesting sidebar. Talk to us about what's going on here.
Well, we're about to literally set sail. In fact, I think...
Bon voyage. You want me to read 2 to 3?
Yeah, read verses 2 and 3 so then we can kind of talk about it.
Okay, it says, "And embarking in a ship at Adramyttium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for."
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Adramyttium was a coastal city like up north a bit. So basically the ship was just born there.
And it's Adramyttium.
Oh, Adramyttium. Thanks.
Just want to make sure we got the right place.
Yeah, I can't pronounce it. It's hard. It has a little red squiggly line under my notes, which means Word has no idea what that is either. It can't pronounce it. I can't pronounce it. But anyway, so it's kind of like, it doesn't really matter that much. It just happened to tell us where the ship came from. But let's talk about this Aristarchus guy.
We've talked about him before. You might remember Aristarchus. We saw him, where did we see him? Acts 19?
Yeah.
Was that the last time we saw him?
Yep.
Aristarchus was a Jewish believer, and we get that, I think, from Colossians.
Chapter 4, yeah.
If you remember in Acts 19, Paul's at Ephesus for 3 years, and there's a silversmith, his name is Demetrius, who plots against Paul. And Aristarchus actually comes up and stands beside Paul and stands up for him, which was a really cool thing. We see him a couple of times. He was just a really faithful believer, and I think more than that even, he was a really good friend to Paul. And by the fact that we see him multiple times through this indicates that this is a guy who was in it for the long haul. He was there for the good times. Presumably, we don't really hear about those. He was definitely there for the bad times. Aristarchus hops in at like some of the most dire moments. And even now, as Paul is in chains, he's still a prisoner. here's Aristarchus,
Yeah.
all the way in from
And he's going to
Thessalonica.
go all the way through the shipwreck with him too. So
He's all the way there.
he's a faithful, faithful friend. So it says that they put in at Sidon. And if you're not familiar with nautical terms, and I am most definitely not, that just kind of means that they docked the ship probably to unload cargo. So again, they didn't really have like cruise ships that people would ride for fun in these times. If there was a sailing vessel, it was either for fishing or transporting cargo or something like that. So that's what we have going on here. Sidon was about 70 miles north of Caesarea where they boarded. So kind of think about them going up the coast there. So they must have had a pretty good wind to help them go all the way up 70 miles that quickly.
Yeah. And Sidon was either one of the best or the best port on the continent. So this is a very convenient place to put in at, to leave at. So it's not surprising they found a good cargo ship there. And this is what I think is particularly interesting. It's why I started by saying centurions tend to treat believers well. The centurion, this guy named Julius, he actually allows Paul to go out and be refreshed by his friends here at Sidon. This is truly amazing because if Paul were to, let me rephrase this. If the centurion Julius were to lose his prisoner, which in this case is Paul, he would be convicted and given the death penalty.
Yeah,
so
he loses his life.
So if he loses Paul, he loses his life. And he lets Paul just get off at this.
It's amazing.
At this port and
He
go.
trusts him not to abscond. He trusts
that.
the prisoner with his own life. So that makes
amazing.
us go,
Yeah.
I wish I knew more, about their relationship. How did he get to know Paul? How well did he know Paul? He must have known him pretty well. Was he in the palace at Caesarea? Was Paul ever chained to him? Had he led him to Christ? I mean, we just don't know the information, but obviously he trusts him implicitly.
Clearly.
So,
and there were presumably quite a few Christians in Phoenicia, and these were Paul's friends. He's been a prisoner for 2 years at this point?
Yeah.
You can imagine his savings account was pretty depleted. He probably didn't have a lot of clothes, not a lot of food. He didn't have any money. And so Julius allowing him to go and be refreshed by his believers in Phoenicia is a big deal because this means that Paul is going to get clothes and he's going to get food to bring on his trip. Again, not a cruise ship. They don't have a kitchen that they're going to just serve you really great food from all day. He's going to have to bring his own food. Yeah. It's kind of a terrible situation if you're a prisoner. I imagine you're not treated real well. And the believers in Phoenicia are going to give Paul everything he needs for this journey. And obviously he comes back to the ship as he promised because Julius trusted him and had very good reason to. Let me read verses 4 to 8. I mentioned a little bit ago that this is one of the most detailed accounts of just any sort of nautical voyage that we have from this time period. You're about to see some of that detail in here. Starting in verse 4 of chapter 27, it says, "And putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go farther, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lycia." It was a lot of names.
I know. That's a lot.
You're like, oh.
I didn't know what under the lee of Cyprus meant. I had no idea. So apparently lee means shelter in nautical terms. So what they did was Cyprus was an island and they went under the island to buffer them from the winds. Obviously, when you have wind over water, there is absolutely nothing to stop the wind. So you can get some really bad storms. The minute you hit land, you've got topography, you've got buildings, you've got people, you've got a lot of things, trees to kind of buffer that wind. So then they hit a town called Myra, and there they find this Alexandrian grain ship bound for the Roman Empire. So what these ships would do is they would go down to Egypt. Obviously, you know where that is, down south in North Africa. And that was kind of like the breadbasket of the Roman Empire, kind of like what Kansas and Nebraska would be to the United States. They produced most of the grain. So they would load up these cargo ships, and then those ships would sail northwest and take it to the rest of the Roman Empire. Well, you could get passage on these cargo ships from time to time, and this is how they transported prisoners and how people traveled if they absolutely had no other choice, because nobody wanted to do this. This is
not pleasant.
It's not a good gamble. Too many things can go wrong on these really primitive ships. So let's talk just a little bit more about the primitive ships, because you kind of got to get this picture in your mind. So obviously you can picture, it's a wooden structure. It's got sails on it, and those sails would be lowered or raised depending on the winds and their needs, kind of like sailboats today. Then they would have oars that also protruded out the side through holes in the actual ship, up kind of high, and the oars would go down, and then they would row as well, because they don't have an engine. They have two rudders. They have to have more than one, because they don't have the ability on like nice ball bearings to turn their rudder depending on how they want it to go. So they have two, which they will lower the one going closest to the direction that they want at any given moment into the water. They row, they sail, but still, you imagine you've got strong winds at times, and you've got currents, and sometimes the currents are going the wrong way. And
Half the time they are.
They don't have any navigational equipment on board, so they are at the mercy of their surroundings and stars and sun and moon and all those things to kind of figure out where on earth they are in the middle of these vast seas. So this is not something that you just take lightly, and this is not a fun cruise for them.
But there is a way to mitigate this, and that is by only sailing in the summer, because you have a lot less wind and just way lower chance of some terrible storm happening. And so they'd really nicely mapped out, like, when do we sail?
To the day.
Down to the day. They were very precise. Anything after November 12th, they're just not even sailing. That's not even worth it.
Right.
What is it, like September 15th to November 11th? It's like sail with caution. If you don't have to, don't.
Try not to.
Before September 15th, it's like, you're going to be fine. It's summer. It'll be okay. So we ask ourselves, when are these guys sailing? And because Luke is precise, we can figure this out.
You can probably guess.
Yeah, I've given enough foreshadowing at this point. You can guess what the answer is going to be. Let me read you verses 9 through 11 of chapter 27.
Actually, just 9 and 10, I think.
Oh, I'll just read 9 and 10. It says, since much time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo in the ship, but also of our lives. So I said you could figure out the date. This great fast, this is the Day of Atonement, what you might hear as Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur follows a very specific schedule, so we know that this would have been in early October. Ooh.
Yeah, not the greatest time. Not the greatest time.
Little risky. It's really important that we think through like where they are. So Paul warns, let's not keep going. And the way he phrases it sounds, at least to me, it sounds sort of prophetic in nature. I perceive that there will be great loss of life, all this stuff. And I'm sure that the Spirit was speaking to him, but also he's a smart guy and he knows this. He's like, guys, it's October. We're getting real close to the no-go zone of November 12th. Let's not do this. This isn't worth it. We're in this place called Fair Havens. Let's just stay here, hang out. It'll be fine, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, you had referred to this a while ago, but I just wanted you to know, if you heard Noel kind of in the intro say that Paul had been shipwrecked 3 other times, and you're thinking, wait a minute, I've been through the whole book of Acts with you, and I don't remember any of this, because we don't really know when they happened. We're not really told. But in 2 Corinthians, a book that he had written prior, quite a long time ago, prior to this experience, 2 Corinthians 11:25, he says, 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea. So he has already, you can see why he's like, guys, please don't do this.
He's like, I'm a very experienced sailor. I'm very
He's
experienced
like,
with these
I don't want to be
shipwrecks."
shipwrecked again. And they're like, oh no, number 4 coming up for you, Paul. But you know, what's just so interesting to me again, how gracious this servant of God is. He is so gracious. I mean, you don't see him pitching a fit. You don't see him cursing everybody out, saying you guys are losers. You don't even understand. How can you possibly call yourself sailors? I keep getting shipwrecked. It's going to happen again. He's like, this is really unwise. Let's not do this. And they're like, no, we're going to do it.
Let me read you verse 11.
goes-
You'll see their response. It's fascinating. But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. So this guy was comfortable putting his life in Paul's hands when he lets him go see his friends, but doesn't trust him enough to do this. And in some ways, you can kind of understand where that's coming from. Paul, by trade, is a tent maker, and the guys piloting the ship are presumably by trade
Sailors.
they're sailors. They're ship captains. So he's going, I'll trust these guys. And yeah, I know we really shouldn't sail around this time, but you know, we'll do this. I just have to ask you though, group, if you're with us on Facebook Live or YouTube Live, what is the incentive for these guys to sail at this moment? Why would they even do that? I mean, if Paul is smart enough to know that this is not a great idea, why are they choosing to sail? These experienced sailors, they don't have to. What is their incentive to go put their lives in grave danger right now? I just don't understand.
And I especially think of the centurion. I mean, he trusted Paul enough to say, I will put my life on the line. I trust you so much. And then Paul says, let's not do this.
Yeah.
And the centurion's like, no, let's listen
do
to,
it.
we're going to listen to these guys and we're going to go ahead and do it anyway. It just seems like that doesn't go together for me. So we're anxious to kind of see what you think the difference is.
So the question is, why are they going to continue on even against all good wisdom? Emily says, are they selling grain? Good question, Emily. So we just talked about this a second ago. What is on this ship?
It's grain.
It's grain.
Yep.
So maybe they think the grain's gonna go bad, or they just really want to dump their wares and get the money for it.
I was just gonna say, you don't get paid till you sell. So I had not even thought of that, but that would absolutely have been part of it. They don't wanna stop. They want to get their money. They gotta keep rolling.
Yeah. Bob says they are Romans and they want to go home. You can understand that. You've been somewhere and you're like, oh, can I just get home right now? And Margie says, well, Paul wasn't a sailor. So they're like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. We don't care.
True.
Shireen says, wanting Paul to die without it being their fault. That's an interesting one.
Interesting. That's a good comment.
And Susie says, it's about the grain. They've got to sell their grain.
Commerce. Commerce.
It's all just economic for these guys. Always.
Yeah. We're not really told, but let's go to verse 11. Those were great.
Yeah.
Great thoughts. Verse 12.
Let me read actually verse 11 into 12. I think it'll make sense. But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there.
Okay, so now
let's
we get a
talk-
little bit more info.
I want to understand, why is Fairhaven's not a suitable place to spend the winter?
Yeah.
When I read this, I assumed that like maybe Fairhaven's is like they get 1 million inches of snow every year, or like it's some like miserable experience. They're like, we can't even dock our ship here. That's how I always read it. What's really going on?
No, well, historians just say that it was boring. That's just what it boils down to. Like Fairhaven's was like, I don't know, just some rural place where there was nothing happening and
They
there were
didn't
no
have
restaurants.
any fun restaurants or cool clubs to go to. The hotels were
there was no
kinda
bowling
sucky.
alleys. There's just nothing. So I think everybody on the ship was like, Phoenix is so great. You know, Phoenix has all this cool stuff to do. Phoenix has all the good restaurants and the movie theaters. They're like, we can make it.
It's only 40 miles, by the way. It's not that far. Yeah, so they all wanted to go spend the winter in Phoenix, which was fun and nice. And they're like, it's only 40 miles. It's about a day sailing. And yeah, it's October, but I mean, the September to November 11th thing is more of like a be cautious, be careful. It's not necessarily that you're gonna die. So
You just might.
you just might
So
die.
they roll the dice, you know.
You
They're
can
like,
either
"We
be
can make it."
bored, or you can maybe die, but if you don't, you'll end up in Phoenix.
Oh man.
You can understand where these sailors
Human
were coming
nature,
from.
I'll tell you. There is something wrong with all of us, isn't there?
Yeah, but I do think Emily and some others make a good point. They also probably want to sell, and they can't do that here in Fairhaven. So I think
True.
that makes a lot of sense.
That is true. Why don't you read verses 13 to 16?
Great. Now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete, close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind, called the northeaster, struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground in Syrtis, they lowered their gear, and thus they were driven along.
All right.
Oof.
So their plan is to literally bump along the coast of this island so that they're kind of protected. But this northeast wind swoops down. They've got mountain ranges kind of here. We don't know if it came off the mountain ranges. We don't know if it swooped through the valley, but whatever it did.
Significant.
Remember, all they have are rudders, sails, and oars. You get a hurricane happening and you are toast.
Yeah.
You got nothing. You're going to pull your sails down. You're going to row like crazy. And you're going to be completely at the mercy of whatever the wind and the waves are going to do to you.
Yeah, so they get blown way off course. I think it's interesting in 16 it says we managed with difficulties to secure the ship's boat.
They're 30 miles off course now.
Ooh.
Like right now, like fast. And so when it talks about the ship's boat,
What is that?
Is that the same thing? What are we talking about? So cargo ships usually towed behind them in decent weather, what we would call a dinghy. Again,
Just a little boat.
Nautical terms, but yeah, it's just a little like we might think of it like a lifeboat. That's not really what they used it for, but about that size. So just a nice little boat, and they would use that boat to kind of go out and drop anchors so that they could get the anchors where they wanted them. They might help like row the boat to shore if they needed to dock it somewhere. And in the first sign of bad weather, they would always hoist that dinghy up onto the main ship because they would lose it if it were just splashing around in the waves. It was so small. But this storm hit so fast and so violently that they couldn't get it up in time. Like normally they would see it coming and they would just get the boat in. At this point, they can't. Like they're in trouble. These people are in trouble right now. This happened way too fast.
And then in 17 it says that they, after hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship, which is a weird thing to say.
Why don't you
as well.
read verse 17?
Yeah, it's after hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground in Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. Okay. So we're getting pretty technical here, but explain to us what this is, because it's still kind of old.
Yeah.
It's simple technical things.
Yeah, well, it's a primitive boat, so it's wood, and the wood can break apart very easily. So they would actually have like cables, ropes that they would use to go under and kind of secure the bottom of the boat. Is that called the hull? I think some of you are better at the nautical terms.
We're real professionals with the boat stuff.
I don't really sail that much.
I like how you say all that much, like you sail it all. I don't sail that much. She never sails. She gets seasick.
I do. I get terribly
She does
motion
not
sickness.
sail.
I don't go on boats if I can help it. I would have been dead. Anyway, when it says that they feared that they would run aground off Syrtis, I had to look up what Syrtis was because it was like all the commentators assumed that you know this information.
Yeah, who doesn't know Syrtis?
I've never heard of this until I read this in Acts. So apparently, off the coast of North Africa again, there was a place where like water kind of weirdly converged, and
it created sandbars.
Because it did that, the silt and the rocks and the sand built up there, and so you couldn't see it from the sea, but there were sandbars and reefs and rocks very close to the surface of the water, but not close enough to the coast that you could just like hop out and swim to shore. So if you hit these sandbars, you were a goner. Your boat was going to be utterly destroyed, because remember, even the primitive boats, as long as they're flowing with the water and they're shored up with their cables and everything is okay, it should, at least for a while, make it. What you don't want is for the boat to suddenly not be moving with the water, like to run aground, and now it's getting pounded with the waves and the wind.
You're done.
It shatters it.
Yeah.
So they cannot hit the sandbar. So they don't know where they are, and they are so afraid that they're going to hit these sandbars and die. All the sailors know that's a death sentence.
Absolutely. So in order to accomplish this, they would have dropped their sails, and I assume they already had, and possibly dropped an anchor too to weigh them down. So when it says gear, it could refer to either or both of these. And based on the severity, I'm assuming that they had already lowered their sails and they're dropping anchors now
think so.
to try to keep themselves where they are so that they're not running into these sandbars. Let me read for you 18 through 20. It says, since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned.
Okay, so things
sad.
are getting bad. So some of you, I think, rightly pointed out that one of the reasons they wanted to go ahead and do this journey was because they had all their cargo. They had all this grain.
They tossed it. They're done.
So much for that. They're going, well, we can toss it over and maybe we'll survive, or we can keep it and we all die. So it doesn't matter if we have the grain at this point. So they're tossing that over. When it says tackle, that's really, in Greek, that's kind of an ambiguous term, and nobody really knows what that means exactly. They think it could be some of the non-essential gear. They think it could be even like furniture, like the bedding that they would have had to sleep on, mats and things like that. Anything that they didn't need, basically, commentators feel like it all went overboard to lighten up the ship so it wouldn't, because again, they're terrified of these sandbars. They don't want to be sinking low in the water if they can help it. They want to be up higher and hopefully avoid those things. But I think the really interesting part, Noelle, is where it says they didn't see the sun, moon, and stars for many days. When I first read that, I was like, oh, that feels like Pennsylvania. Like there are weeks that go by that I basically see none of that stuff. All I see are clouds, and how depressing that must have been. But that's
it's
not
a depressing issue. I mean, it was depressing, but it
not
wasn't
like that.
They're not like, oh, I've got that seasonal affective depression,
No, there was something else going on here.
Yeah, well, that's how they navigated. Is they looked at the stars, they looked at the position of the sun, the position, and that's how they're navigating. That's how they're figuring out where they are. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's interesting. They kind of have an idea that these sandbars are lurking. They kind of know where they are, but they can't figure out where they are right now in relation to that because they can't see the sky. They've got nothing to guide themselves with. And that had to be just absolutely terrifying to have no idea where you are.
You're in the middle of this storm. You're being just wrecked by the waves
you don't know
and the
how
wind,
far you've gone,
the rain,
or in what direction.
You don't know what's around you. You don't know which way you should even be trying to go. I mean, they're literally like they have no compass. They've got nothing. How scary would this be?
It would be so terrifying. And I think when it says that they started throwing it over with their own hands, I mean, at this point, everyone on the ship is very aware that this is going downhill fast. If they're not thinking back to what Paul said in verse 10, where he was like, hey, this is going to result in loss of cargo, loss of life. I bet at this point they're like, dang it, I knew that guy was. Should have listened to him. And so God had told Paul really explicitly that he was going to be a witness in Rome. Paul hasn't gotten to Rome yet. So Paul must know at this point, because he's got a lot of history with God fulfilling his promises. Yeah. He's like, I'm going to get to Rome. So this isn't the end, at the very least for me, and probably not for everybody else either. We're probably going to make it through it. So let me read you verses, I think I'm going to just go all the way through 26.
Okay.
Is that okay?
21
to 26. Paul to the rescue. Amazing. This is verse 21. It says, since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But We must run aground on some island.
All right. So I love how Paul starts by just kind of reminding them, like he doesn't exactly say, I told you so, but he kind of does, but in a nice way. He's like, I told you we shouldn't have
But
done
he
this.
has to say that here because he's about to make an outrageous claim to them.
True.
So I don't think this is out of any sort of like ego or like, I told you so, I told you this.
No,
I think
that's
this was
not
like
his
establishing
personality.
credibility. Like, I told you that this is going to go poorly. As you see, it has gone poorly. I'm now going to tell you something else about the future, and I want you to believe me in the same way that you wish you had believed me back in verse 10.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's just establishing that he has a great track record of telling them the truth here.
Which he does. And then he's like, okay, you guys, you need to stop and eat something. They haven't been eating. You can kind of understand why. I mean, first of all, the seasickness had to just be off the charts. Number two, when you're worried and you think you're going to die, the last thing on your mind is what snacks are available. So they've been beside themselves worried. They've been, I'm sure, sick. Even sailors, if you get into this type of thing, like they can get seasick too, even if they are used to it.
I think it's also a statement though of giving them something to do that indicates a future for them. Because if you're about to die, there's no reason to eat. Like, you're about to die. You're done. And he's like, no. We're not going to die. You are going to live to see tomorrow. So you need to eat because you're going to be hungry. And it's going to matter tomorrow that you're hungry. So let's actually act like there is a tomorrow, and let's act like there is a future. And the way we do that is by eating.
Gives them hope.
Yeah, it gives you like a way to feel like there is something coming next.
Such a great thing. So then he tells them how this angel shows up to deliver a message to him. What's really interesting to me is that the angel didn't stop the storm.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got this angel, presumably powerful. Presumably, if Paul had wanted the angel to stop the storm, maybe the angel could have just done it. But that doesn't seem to be even remotely on the radar of what might happen, what could happen, and obviously what did happen. So the angel doesn't whisk Paul and his friends out of the situation. He just informs him, don't be afraid. And none of the people on the ship should be afraid either, because God is going to protect your life. He's not going to rescue you from the suffering and the hard times here, but he is going to protect you. And isn't that just like God, honestly, to do that for us too? I mean, how many times have you and I cried out to God in the middle of something terrifying or difficult and said, God, please make it stop. Just make it stop. And God says, I'm not going to make it stop, but I'm going to be with you every single step of the way through it, and you're going to get through this.
Yeah.
And that is truly how he likes to work, and it's better for everybody. I think the sparing of everybody on the ship, let's just kind of stop and think about this. We've got Luke, Aristarchus, and Paul. So we've got three people, maybe the centurion, we don't know, but for sure three that do believe in the God of the Bible, that do have a relationship with Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. We've got like 273 other people that don't.
Right.
We've got sailors who would have been just base, polytheistic, if anything.
They're
immoral,
They're
not good people. We've got prisoners. Outside of Paul, you assume that most or all of them have actually committed crimes. That's why they're prisoners. Paul's probably the only innocent one on the boat. Then you've got soldiers, again, not usually the nicest people in the world, certainly not followers of God. So you've got these pagan people that have no interest in God, no relationship to God, no future with God outside of him wooing them to himself. And God says to Paul, you tell all those people, none of them are going to die in this storm.
That's really cool. It's really neat to see how those around him get to experience the blessing of God just by, being in proximity to Paul. And I love seeing that happen. I think that even happens in our lives today, or should, is that the people who are around us experience the blessing of God just by being in proximity to people who are loving and serving Jesus Christ.
Absolutely.
And so Paul then tells them how this is going to close, and he says, we're not going to have issues at open sea. We are going to run aground and shipwreck. So, what happens?
Well, maybe we should read 27 to 32.
Let's do it. Let's
Keep
do
going.
it. Okay, so this is verse 27. It says, when the 14th night had come, they're 2 weeks in, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. A little farther on, they took a sounding again, and they found 15 fathoms. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go.
Bye-bye, boat. All right,
Call
so
it a
let's talk
day.
about soundings. I had no idea what this was either. I've learned so much nautical stuff in this study. I hope you're learning it too. So what they would do is, because again, they don't have navigational equipment, they don't have any way of knowing how deep the water is under them, they would have a rope, and then tied to the rope would be like a tiny anchor, something that was heavy to sink, but not like huge and heavy. So they would throw that over, let the rope out until it hit the bottom. Then they would mark the rope where the water was.
Pull their Sharpie out.
Yeah. And then they would pull it in, and then they would measure the rope to see how they measured in fathoms, which is about 6 feet. How many feet deep, basically how many fathoms under them was the water. So the first time that they measured, they came up with about 120 feet. Then they sailed a little further. They dropped it down again. They got about 93 feet. So they know that they're getting closer to shore, which is what they wanted to know. Like, how close are we? Are we getting there? Then it says that they dropped 4 anchors, Noelle. That seems excessive.
Well, their anchors are a lot lighter than the ones we use today, and so they probably were made out of stone, some were made out of lead, and so in order to be really sure that the boat didn't move, or just that it didn't turn, they dropped all 4 of these anchors, not in one spot, on every corner of the boat, so that it's not turning, it's not moving. And then they pray that morning is going to come so that they can figure out what to do next. Been in those spots before where you're like, please, if morning can just come, we can figure out what to do.
Yeah, where you're just like, this night is so long. Oh Lord, please.
And the night gets longer because the crew during this night decides to mutiny.
Not all of them, just some of them.
Just some of them.
We'll take the anchors out on the dinghy boat. We're going to go do this.
No. Yeah, they're going to roll out. And Paul sees what's happening and knows that these guys are going to make a break for it. And interesting, he doesn't deal directly with the sailors. He goes to his friend and their superior, the centurion, and he says, listen, if they go, everybody's going to die. And the centurion responds to this. I think it's interesting that he doesn't call out to these guys. He's not like, guys, get back in here, everyone's going to die. Paul is a man under authority. He is under the authority of Jesus Christ. And so he understands hierarchies and authority structures. And so he knows that these guys are also under an authority. They are under Julius. And so instead of bothering with them, he goes to Julius. He goes to the authority, the one that can get it done. And not to be too heavy-handed with the point, but I think there are a lot of times where we're dealing with all these people. We need to just go to the authority. Grape up, not down, Like,
Seriously.
go deal with God and let God deal with them. Like, just let it go.
Yeah. Well, God orders things. Like, God's the one who created government, and under government are armed forces and things like that. That's all for our protection. So Paul doesn't say, oh, the government, so bad, we don't have to do anything that they say. He always works within those structures that God has set forth.
And even immoral structures at that. I mean, I'm sure Julius was not some upstanding guy. The whole Roman system is not, a really moral system. But he understands how this works, and so he's going with these guys. I imagine, so Paul's been really on the nose with his predictions so far. I can just imagine Julius getting this and being like, no, we're not doing this again. I figured out what happens when I don't listen to this guy, and we are not losing everybody because I've got a stupid mutiny going on. He, I'm sure, just springs into action.
Yep.
And this time they're smart enough to believe our boy Paul.
Yeah, they were apparently the boat was down, and they were just about to climb down into the boat.
They're like, no.
And he lets them know, you go on on that boat, you are outside of the protection of the God that this guy who predicts everything accurately worships, and you're on your own and you're going to die. And they're like, okay.
Well, I love that they just cut the ropes.
Yeah, I don't know why.
Well, I wonder if their guys weren't even on it yet, and he's like, I'm not even going to give you an opportunity to make a choice here. You're not making a choice. I'm making the choice for you. You're done. Snip. Boats are gone.
Spoken like a true leader. See, I wouldn't have thought to do that, but she would. She'd cut their ropes.
There are times you don't give options. And this is one of those times where I'm sure the centurion was like, you guys have made decisions. I have followed what you said before, and look where that got us. So your judgment has not proven to be excellent. We're done. And he just cuts it. Let me read 33 through 38 for you. This is so good. As the day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food. Again, he's just wonderful. Saying, today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength. For not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you. And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then they were all encouraged, and they ate some themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea.
All right. So don't even need to say a lot about that. It's pretty self-explanatory.
The wheat is completely gone at this point.
No reason to save it. When he says not a head of your hair will perish, that was just an idiom saying you're going to be saved. Nobody's going to be hurt. And that's pretty much how that goes. Let's go on, read. I really want to finish up this chapter.
We can do it. Yeah, verse 39.
To 44. We're almost out of time here.
We're going to finish another chapter tonight. This is amazing. Verse 39. Now when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. Then, hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow struck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest on planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land.
Oh my goodness.
And once again, God comes through.
There it is. What we said a while ago is you want your boat to keep moving. So once they got it stuck, then you just read there, it just starts to break apart. Interesting that the soldiers on board wanted to kill all the prisoners.
Including Paul.
What?
You guys have somebody who can clearly tell the future here. And you want to get rid of him? Like, this is an asset. Like, I get these guys are like pagans. They don't get anything. But think for a second. Like, this is an asset. You want to keep this guy around.
Exactly.
What are you doing?
Here's the other thing. I mean, I know if they lose their prisoners, their neck is on the line. I get that. But,
their neck is already on the line.
Well, these guys have been, okay, so they just barely have eaten in 2 weeks. They are tossed and turned and weary and traumatized. How far can they go? I mean, you know what I mean? Like, where are they going to go? You're on an island. Find them. I don't know. So it just
and the likelihood of these guys surviving it. I mean, who cares at this point? Worry about yourself. Like, let's keep.
Can Rome have a modicum of just like, we're sorry that you were shipwrecked and almost died about 400 times out there. So you lost a prisoner. We'll find him. I don't know. Maybe not. But it just seems like a little out there. But I think what I just see is, like we've been saying, Satan is just dead set on killing Paul.
Yeah.
He's dogged him his entire life. He has moved people to try to take his life over and over and over and over. And you just see it again. Like, here we go again. But once again, God's like, it's not time. It's not time. So, Paul, you're safe. So he moves in the heart of Julius to go, no. Julius, by this time, he's probably like, do I have to do everything? Do I have to make all the decisions?
I feel like at this point, Julius is like, whatever they're suggesting, I'm going to do the opposite of that.
Yeah.
They're suggesting kill everybody, we're going to kill nobody.
That's right.
You guys are making terrible decisions. And so God just moves in his heart. Again, this centurion, is really wonderful to Paul, and he wishes to save Paul. It doesn't indicate actually that he cares about any of the others,
No.
but he wishes to save Paul, which is a great move. And no lives are lost. God's promise stands. As many times as these guys have tried to get themselves and everybody else killed, 0 lives are lost during this. I just want to say, like, from a just pure, like, statistical perspective, the likelihood of having a storm that lasts for 14 days of this magnitude and 0 people dying is slim to none. That just doesn't happen. No. And then to have a shipwreck this bad and nobody dies, this is the hand of God. And I mean, they're going to continue seeing this as we get into chapter 28 next week. I mean, it gets even more incredible. If Julius is not in heaven someday, I'm going to be so mad. I'm going to be like, Julius, you of all people, buddy, you. Yeah. It gets incredible. But it's also great to see everybody get to watch Paul and Luke and Aristarchus just live for the Lord and go through horrible, terrifying situations, and God protects them and God saves them. And I think also just to see that these men have complete trust in their God in a moment where it would make a lot of sense to these pagan, heathen sailor guys in the centurion to be like, well, God got me into this mess. God said I had to go to Rome, and here I am now. I'm done with whatever that is. They are a testimony. Yeah. And they're so faithful. They believe, and they're an encouragement to everybody around them. I love that phrase, and we kind of glossed over it, but Paul breaks the bread and he prays over it, and he gives thanks, and it encourages everybody else. They're not on there being like, well, you got us into this mess, you have to get us out of this, and just being like, Debbie
because
Downers.
He tried to get them out of it before they were in it. They know they don't have a leg to stand on.
He is an encouragement to them this entire time. Yeah. That's also really convicting to me, how hard that is to, even when you know that they're all wrong and they got you into this, and it's just like, dang it, guys, like, we don't have to be there, to just be an encouragement and to be a light. These guys are. Thank you so much, team. We love you. We'll see you back here same time, same place next week, although we won't be physically together. We'll do the split screen again. This was fine. A nice little treat, wasn't it? We live stream on YouTube. We live stream on Facebook. And we'd love for you to be part of our Facebook Bible Study Hub group. In the meantime, go out and love each other, make good decisions. We'll see you next week. Bye.